And we certainly appreciate everything that you've done to be able to join us today at your particular site. And so a lot of people have asked us is why leadership? Why did we pick that particular for today? Well, as we look at the role that agriculture has, and particularly women involved in it, we have women who are now starting to retire off of their farms. We have a responsibility to educate new people. We have a responsibility to encourage new people and to empower all of those people that are women farmers at this moment. And so part of the reason for the looking at the whole leadership thing is how do we pass it on? How do we work together better? As we know, women in agriculture still have some difficulties getting ahead like they should. And we also need to define an avenue for agriculture. What is the direction that we want? And so after you leave today, you'll have some new ideas about how we want to deal with agriculture, how you want to deal with agriculture, how you want to be respected, how you want to get involved in activities, and particularly where you live. I put a couple of little quotes on the bottom of this particular slide that you're looking at right now that talks about from the Food and Agriculture Organization. The first one says that if women had the same accesses to men, particularly as resources go, 150 million more people could be lifted out of poverty because of the food that they grow across the world. The next one is kind of interesting as well, and not to make it sound like a sexist comment at all, but the research has also said that women fill this gap by working 13 more hours per week in agriculture than their men counterparts do. And we all know as women, and we do have some men in some audiences in some of our places, but we also know as women that we have many other responsibilities as well. You know, we're taking care of a family, we might be taking care of an extended family, we might also have a job off the farm to help support the farm. So we wear a lot of hats in these roles that we play as women involved in agriculture. And part of today's conference is also recognizing that, as you'll hear from the two speakers that we have later on that are coming on. And so the next part that I want to do is spend about 3 minutes having you watch a little YouTube video that we have of Laura Lee Lewis. And she had sent this to me earlier as she was beginning to register for the conference. And particularly in Washington State, you may be familiar with Northwest Harvest. And Northwest Harvest's goal is to feed the hungry. And across the state, and I'm sure in the other states that are watching, you have similar counterparts that do this same thing. But they're always looking for farmers who have extra produce, that don't know what to do with it, but they pick it and they bring it to Northwest Harvest. They take it to the food banks. And Laura Lee, in her quest for this, taking care of this opportunity, she developed a song that she has sung, and I'd like to play that for you today so that you can hear that and just give her an acclamate for doing this sort of thing.
Hi there, I'm singer-songwriter, farmer Lori Lee Lewis. You're about to watch a music video called Who Will Feed the Hungry that I wrote right here on my farm, right here on my
feed the hungry, take care of the poor. Who will grow the foods, step through that giving door? Faith can feed the soul, but action fills a plate. Who will feed the hungry? Can you afford a little? Donate. Oh, it hurts my heart to see the hungry and poor. Hunger has no seasons, it's daily at some doors. I can do something to lift another's heart. It doesn't matter how big or small, when compassion is the start. Feed the hungry, take care of the poor. Who action fills a plate. Who will feed the hungry? Can you afford a little and donate? Balance is a tricky thing. We know we can't fix it all. Chaos in our world, some rise up and some fall. People taking care of people, feeling, seeing the need to open our heart to another, starting with love seed. Who will feed the hungry? Take care of the poor. Who will grow the foods? Step through that giving door. Faith can feed the soul, but action fills a plate. Who will feed the hungry? Can you afford a little and donate? Just a little, donate. Who will feed the hungry? Time, food, or money? Please donate.
Thank you, Laura, for letting me share that with the rest of the group. Everybody could see, and I think there's a lot of good messages in the video that we just watched, and looking at how we can share what we produce to make a difference in other people's lives who don't have enough to eat. So I'm going to do another little infomercial for NASS, and this is looking at the agricultural census that's going to come out in December. And all of you have a flyer in your packet about this. And this is very important that all women be counted in the census. And be sure when the census comes that you fill it out, you recognize yourself as being a farmer, and let's be counted, because this makes a difference in the programs that are going to be available for women. It may be the loans, it may be the marketing, it may be all the help that you're going to get. And so until you register yourself and we see the number of women that we truly have involved in agriculture, a lot of things won't change. So watch for the census in December. And if you keep watching the website that we have for Women in Agriculture, or our Facebook page, we'll also continue to promote it on there as well. So let's stand up and be counted for what we do. So a little bit about the workshop details for today. I have several sponsors and funders that I would like to thank for working with us today or being partners, particularly NASS, the National Ag Statistics Service, the Risk Management Agency, Northwest Farm Credit. Northwest Farm Credit supplied you with those beautiful shopping bags that you have today, the USDA Farm Service, and particularly Deborah Hansen and Shelley Stevens in the Colville area, who helped us with our Facebook and our website. And there's many others of you that have gotten involved and helped, particularly the site coordinators. It's a big effort to get this all going in our 40 different locations that we have. And so I thank everyone who became involved with this, and particularly you who came today to join us as well. The other thing that you'll find at many of your groups, and we're going to talk with these people at lunchtime or when we have a break, we were able to offer scholarships to aspiring farmers. In some places we have FFA and 4-H students, and we also have some college students who have joined us. And we made a big push to have these people be part of our Women in Ag Conference, because they are the people who are working toward a career in agriculture, and they want to visit with those of you at the site to find out what is it really like, what are they getting involved with, and also probably looking for a mentor. The other thing that I have available, if you need WSU clock hours, if you're a teacher, you need something for your resume to pick up clock hours for this, just contact me afterwards, and I will make sure that you get the paperwork so you can apply and get the clock hours if it makes a difference in your job or whatever that you're doing, so that you get credit for participating with us today. The clock hours are through the WSU School of Education. So in your packets, you have a personal action plan, and we're going to spend time a little bit later in our individual groups looking at the personal action plan, but we're going to be talking about takeaway messages. And I want you to think about, as we go along today, what's the takeaway message that I heard? What did I hear that's going to make a difference? And a lot of times we go to meetings and say, well, that was nice, now let's go home and get back to work. Well, we don't want it to be that particular way. We want you to have a message that you can take home, something that you can apply. So you'll see in your packet with your action plan, it's in triplicate part. We want you to leave one part with the site that you're at. We want you to take one home, and so that you know what you wrote down. And then the third one will come back to me that they'll also collect at the site. So to be sure to rip off your copy and take it home, and so you can look back and see what really was your takeaway message that you heard from the speakers, that you heard from other women, and what you heard in small groups. And it also gives you a timeline when you can set some goals for what you want to accomplish. And when I get this information back from you, it's very important, because this is what we use with our grants and documenting how helpful the program is that we're doing right now. So please help us out with your action plan, and help yourself as well. I show this slide periodically or at several of the conferences that I have, because I think it's very important, because it looks at what was called the Pullman's Tractorette School in 1942. Excuse me. In 1942, all the men had gone off to war, and they brought the women on campus in Pullman to teach them how to run tractors. And they replaced and the women, the men in World War II. And after they finished all of their training, they drove their tractors on the Washington State College campus. That's when it was called Washington State College campus. After 3 weeks of instruction, newsreel people came from Paramount, MGM, and they were on hand to film the event. Now, some of you aren't quite old enough to remember going to the movies, but when you went there, they had a little film that they showed during the movies of something that was happening in the world or the United States. And so an estimated 50 million movie fans saw in their home theaters the local women parading their skills after they'd learned how to drive their tractors. And this is just another picture of women working on the farms during World War II, a great picture of them, and the acclamations that they have for what they're doing to help support agriculture. So just something to remember, that there were many people that came before us in agriculture, and of course those of us now, and many to come after us as well. A few facts about women farmers that I want to share, and some of you have seen these facts before, that you've read them, but I think it's something to resonate with you as you talk about your role as being women involved in agriculture. That 3.3 million farm operators women are 1 million strong of women who are operating farms. And when all the women involved in farming are added up with the primary and secondary operators, they total 31% of all U.S. farmers. Now, the only reason that we know these statistics, and they're a little bit old right now, is because of the census. And so when you fill out your census again in December, be counted so that we can show what the numbers really are for women involved. The other fact is younger women are entering farming faster than older women are leaving. That's wonderful. We're not losing our bank and nor our institutional memory. Women farm slightly more than 301 million acres in the United States. I think the next fact is even better. Women have a higher land ownership rate than males, with 85% of women owning all the land they farm, compared to 66% of their male counterparts. Now, you can make your assumptions on why this might be, the size, how they inherited it, how they purchased it, whatever. But I think it looks well for women that they own 85% of the land that they farm. And the last statistics is no other male-dominated industry is experiencing such rapid turnover as the women rise to leadership roles. And that's another impetus of why we're having this program today, is who's shaping agriculture when so many women are involved in agriculture that need to be helped making those decisions for the direction that agriculture is going, and that women are getting the things that they really need to be exceptional farmers. And so I've showed this slide before, is what do we call ourselves? Is it hurting or helping our image? So I want you to think about this, and it might be a little tabletop conversation at lunchtime, but you're a farmer and you're not a producer. Many women say, well, I'm a producer. Well, actually, you are a farmer because people want to buy from a farmer. They want to know who made their food, who grew their food, where's it coming from, how do they handle it. So let's call ourselves farmers when we truly are farmers. And farmers own farms. They don't own an operation. You know, kids go to a farm, make field trips to a farm. They don't make a field trip to an operation. That's kind of like when you go to the hospital, you know, to have your appendix out. You know, I mean, kids go to farms, and we want them to know what a farm really is so they can remember their culture, because too many of our kids, as we know from our nutrition classes, think that food comes from the back of Safeway rather than from a farm. And the other important thing to remember is farmers have customers, not consumers. Customers keep coming back. You keep going back to the hardware store, not because you're a consumer, but you're a customer. And that's what you want, to come back to your farm all the time, to look at what you have for your produce stand or wherever you sell your product, is that you have customers. And that's what's important. And I gained some of this information from the Wisconsin Farm Bureau when they talked about what are we calling ourselves to have more integrity for what we do. So think about it when you talk about yourself, when you explain to somebody, what do I do? You know, where do I live? What do I produce? What do I grow? So people truly understand, you know, what women involved in agriculture means. So at this particular point, I want to go into our keynote speaker, our first keynote speaker, and is a little introduction for Alexis Taylor. She's the director of Ag from Oregon State, and a little bit of background on Alexis before she joins us here is that she was appointed director of the Oregon Department of Ag by Governor Kate Brown in December of 2016. She works for the governor and the legislature, as well as agriculture, conservation, and consumer groups to carry out the state agricultural policy. So Oregon Department of Agriculture has a threefold mission to ensure food safety and consumer protection, also protecting our natural resources, and marketing Oregon agricultural products around the state and the country and the world. And as you look at your director of ag in the particular states that you live in, I'm sure the mission is very, very similar, but maybe the way they go about it is not particularly the way that Alexis goes about it, because Alexis comes from a farming background. She'll talk about that in her presentation. But before she came to Oregon, she worked at USDA, and she helped develop a lot of the programs relative to the driving force, looking at supporting the growing and diverse next generation of farmers and ranchers, particularly women. She oversaw the U.S. Department of Ag, former Ag and Foreign Agricultural Services, which was the FSA as we know it, the RMA, and the Agricultural Service, the FAS. She worked hard to build new markets across the globe and improve the overall competitive position for U.S. agricultural products. So now I'd like to welcome Alexis Taylor, and before she comes on for her presentation, that at all of your sites, there's a section on your website where you can type in questions that your audience might have, and I will be monitoring those questions as we go along. And at the end of Alexis' presentation, then she will answer those questions as I relate them to her. So Alexis, welcome to the 2017 Women in Agriculture Conference.
Great, thank you. Can everyone hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you so much for this exciting opportunity to be able to speak to really so many accomplished women leaders and future leaders in the food and agriculture sector across the Western United States. It's a real honor personally to be here to talk about a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, not only as a woman, but also as a senior executive at the Oregon Department of Agriculture and a senior executive in state government in Oregon. I will talk a little bit about my career progression, as I really think it has informed the kind of leader, mentor, and boss I have tried to be really today in my current role. The foundation of my career was really established, as Margaret mentioned, growing up on my family farm in Iowa. It's a farm that has been in my family for 158 years this year. Actually, as long as Oregon's been a state, my family has been farming the same land in Iowa. Really, however, when I think back about my career and my career path through 8 years in the Army Reserves and Army Active Duty, 9 years working on Capitol Hill for various members and working on several farm bills, 4 years at USDA, and now just under a year at the Oregon Department of Agriculture, it's really impossible for me to claim its successes as uniquely my own or really as a result of an established farm family. Instead, I really believe they're a result of numerous mentors, teachers, and leaders who have supported me, challenged me, and given me opportunities along the way. Really, the first of which has been my father. My dad only had 2 daughters. And so growing up on a farm, when the cows needed to be fed or it was harvest time and he needed someone to haul grain for him, it was me or my sister doing it. So growing up, I did not realize that there were things that people maybe thought I shouldn't do just because of my gender. And that is really something that I have carried with me throughout my job and throughout my career, that there is nothing that I have not thought that I couldn't do just because I'm a woman. I'm originally, as I said, not from Oregon, and I'm often asked why I was interested in moving to a state where I really had very few ties. One of the reasons for me personally, it was the first time I was going to actually have the opportunity to work for a woman. I've only had male bosses up until this point, and obviously the woman I work for is the governor, Governor Kate Brown. The other reason that was so exciting about Oregon to me was just how many women farmers and ranchers there are in Oregon. But also, as I look across all the 6 states represented in this conference in the West, we have a very strong female producer presence that's really exciting. Every state is well over the national average. I mentioned men early on and a few times, and I think that's an important topic to spend a little bit of time on. I've been very lucky to have many wonderful male bosses. As I said, bosses who challenged me, pushed me, put their trust in me, gave me huge opportunities. So I really want to underscore that point that I don't think women can be successful in agriculture without buy-in from men and leadership from men. During my last year at USDA, I received a promotion where I took over, as Margaret mentioned, the Farm and Foreign Agricultural Services, FFAS. We love our acronyms in government. FFAS was one of 7 mission areas that oversaw 3 of the 17 agencies at USDA. And the Farm Service Agency, the Risk Management Agency, which is the government side of the crop insurance program, and then the Foreign Agricultural Service. All told, I had 14,000 employees spread across 2,100 rural county offices in every single state and territory and 94 countries all over the world. So my second week on the job, I went to Commodity Classic. Commodity Classic is an annual meeting and trade show for the wheat, corn, soybean, and sorghum industries. At that meeting, it was kind of like a coming out party for me in my new role. And I spoke to every single board of directors and all the producers that were there in 4 separate meetings. And I was giving a speech of introducing myself, talking about some of the priorities I was going to focus on in my last year in that job. And at one of the meetings, a gentleman raised his hand, and he questioned why, because I talked about diversity and why diversity in leadership organizations such as theirs were really important. And he questioned why. He said, you know, women are involved in agriculture and they have been for years. His grandmother, his mother, his wife is home farming right now. So why does it need to be a priority when women are farming, they are ranching, they're part of the industry as a whole? And, you know, I couldn't have set that question up more perfectly. And my answer was, because you're here and she's not. Yes, women are involved in agriculture. Yes, they are farmers. Yes, they are ranchers, but they also need to be leaders in the industry and sitting on those boards and commissions and sitting on those policy committees, really making the policy for their association, for the commodity they're raising nationwide. Similarly, that same year at a different event, I was in Iowa, and they had I had been asked to come speak to about 60 rural leaders, many of which who are rural lenders, on the Women in Agriculture initiative that I had helped launch during my time at USDA. The first thing the host did when I walked in, she apologized and she said, "There's only 3 women in the audience. We're so sorry." And my response, "That's great. That's who I need to be talking to." A room full of men who need to hear the value that women are bringing to agriculture, the value they're bringing to farming and ranching, the value they bring to talk to our customers and consumers all over the United States. You know, we're out there, the data proves it, but we also need to be the face of agriculture and be the leaders in the industry. Margaret talked about some of this, but the 2012 census notes that nearly 1 million women are working Americans' lands, meaning 31% of American farmers are women. Throughout the United States, there are roughly 288,000 women principal operators, which is 14% of the total US farms, and that's a 21% increase over the last decade. Together, women are generating nearly $13 billion in annual agricultural sales. Women are farming and ranching and working in agribusinesses up and down the supply chain. But what are we doing as women to ensure there are more women behind those women doing farming and ranching? One thing we can do is to engage the next generation to understand that there are careers in farming and ranching, but there are careers in food and agriculture far beyond just farming and ranching. We know the future of rural America depends on the next generation of farmers and ranchers, but also business execs, scientists, teachers, and policymakers. And as a community, what are we doing? I think we really need the collective we to look in at ourselves and see what are we doing to ensure they're prepared, that next generation is prepared. When I was growing up, I knew I did not want to farm. There takes a certain entrepreneurial spirit for anyone who wants to take on that amount of risk. I inherently don't have it. My dad did, best job he ever had. I knew I wasn't going to be a farmer, but I did not realize that at a young age that I could still have an incredible career in agriculture, working in food and working in agriculture, and be able to give back to farmers like my dad and my uncle and my friends and family members growing up who were farming. And I know if I did not realize that, there are many young people today contemplating their futures that don't know it either. In 2015, USDA and Purdue University published a study that really found, that looked at this fact, how many jobs we're going to need in the food and ag sector and how many college graduates we're going to have. So what they found was approximately 58,000 jobs will be open in agriculture, food, and natural resources each year between 2015 and 2020. According to the report's projections, almost half of the opportunities will be in management and business, another 27% in the STEM field. Jobs in sustainable food and biomaterials production will make up 15%, while 12% of the openings will be in education, communication, and governmental services. Of the expected 58,000 average annual openings, the new graduates in the US with expertise in food, agriculture, renewable resources, or the environment are expected to only fill 61% of those spots. So what does that mean? It means there's a lot of great job opportunity in the food and agriculture, natural resource sector, but we're going to have to be looking outside of our traditional colleges of ag to fill them, and in the short term, and hopefully getting new interested people into the College of Ag and natural resource buckets in the long term. One of the things the report also found was that women make up more than half of the food, agriculture, renewable, natural resources, and environment higher education degrees in the United States. To really meet the demand that's coming down the pipe in the food and ag sector, it's important to engage young people. And I was really excited when I found out that we have college students, FFA members, 4-H members attending sites all over, because we really need to figure out how do we engage them now, but really before they get to this point, that there are really exciting opportunities in agriculture. I have had amazing jobs in agriculture that have literally taken me to over 30 countries in the world. I grew up on a farm in Iowa outside of a town of 300 people. I never could have imagined growing up the types of opportunities I could have in a career at a young age because I was working in a sector like agriculture. But it's not just about engaging farm kids like myself. It's also about engaging maybe people who don't come from the farm but really love agriculture and want to support that as a sector. At USDA, my chief of staff grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia, but she learned to love agriculture and developed really a rewarding career in the field. And one of the values I thought she brought is she used her background to help translate the importance of agricultural issues to non-rural consumers. That's who we need to also talk to, what we're doing, why we're doing it, why we're using certain production practices to our customer base. As we work to really tell agriculture's story and attract the next generation of industry, we really need to work to build a pipeline for the next generation of women leaders in agriculture and prepare them for some of the unwritten rules of leading as a female in agriculture. This includes greater representation in leadership roles on commodity commissions and boards, federal advisory committees, county and state committees, even local school boards is a great place to start. I really encourage all of you to use your experience and leadership roles to think about how you can mentor up and coming women and show them how to get where you are. I had a woman colleague say one time to me that having women in the room often won't change the direction or decision but they're important to have there. And I actually have to strongly disagree with that statement. I think having women in the room does mean the outcome might be different. Women have a unique voice. Women have a unique perspective. But half of the United States and half of the world are women. So having that unique voice and perspective is vital, even if the outcome is different, even if that decision is different. I think it's key to not ignoring half of the world's population in that voice and perspective on what they care about. I hope that, one of the things that we all take away today is really to lift other women up. And you can do that a couple ways: by setting an example, by putting your name forward, or encouraging other women to put her name forward for different opportunities. Again, some of those local committees, state committees, national committees, whether it's in a public policy arena, a leadership role in a commodity organization that you're active in, really stepping up to the plate, either yourself or encouraging other women to do the same. I think also to talk about the challenges. As Margaret mentioned, we all have many things that we're doing. Sometimes women are working off the farm, they're raising children, you've got to get kids to football practice and piano lessons and all of that. But really talking about sometimes it's an inconvenient time for you personally, but why is it value to carve out and prioritize it when you have a dozen other things that you need to prioritize and there just aren't enough hours in the day? I've really had the privilege to have many women as mentors, formally and informally in my life. Oftentimes I hear that they feel, oftentimes I hear from women that they feel like they're imposing if they ask someone to be a mentor or ask someone to sit down and give them some career advice. I think if we're feeling like that as women, one thing you should ask yourself, and I always pose this question back to women, is if someone came to you and asked you to be their mentor or asked you to grab a coffee so they could bounce some career advice off of you, would you feel like they're imposing? The answer I get is a resounding no. So I think we as women need to remind ourselves that we wouldn't feel that way. Other women and even other men aren't going to feel that way either. If you ask for some time, whether it's informal mentoring, formal mentoring, or just a coffee once in a while. You know, one other thing I think we can do as women is to help other women's voices be heard. About a year ago, the Washington Post wrote a story about the early days of President Obama's first term in the White House, where senior staff was really dominated by men, and women were really wanting more of a seat at the table, but also were struggling to have their voices be heard. They adopted a strategy, and they called it amplification, where one of the women would offer an idea, and if it wasn't acknowledged, another woman would repeat it and really give her colleague credit for suggesting it in the first place. In a group setting, they actually found this approach gave all of their voices more resonance and influence over the decision making. What really struck me when I read this article was how intentional the women in the White House had to be about it. The senior women in the president's inner circle sat down to come up with a formal strategy to have their voices heard. And while it's great they were able to do this and really do this and have it impact the organization, it is also sad that we as women have to formalize some of those strategies and have to be really intentional about it. I do hope someday we get to a point where within our organizations, and I actually hope we all challenge ourselves that within our organizations, that someday this idea of amplification isn't needed because women have an equal seat at the table and their voices are equally heard. Likewise, a close friend and actual mentor of mine is a senior executive in a large agribusiness, where about 1/3 of the senior team are women. I recently saw her and we were talking, and she talked about actually a formal strategy they developed as well, that before any regular meeting with the CEO, all of the women get together and hammer out their differences so they can walk in and not undercut each other in front of their male counterparts or their boss. Again, women are being very intentional about finding ways to support each other, and that's wonderful, but also my hope is someday we're not going to have to be to this point, that we're not working and actually having more work to make sure we can go in and support each other's ideas in front of our male counterparts. I also want to take a couple minutes to talk just about how I try to personally support women involved in agriculture at the department. First, I've mentioned a couple times here about intentionality, and one of the things I try to be is intentional in my hiring decisions. My senior team is made up of half of women. That didn't just happen. That was extremely intentional. As I've had hiring decisions to make, and honestly, as my predecessor had, building a team that is diverse, that's representative of our employees, but also representative, of Oregon agriculture has been really critical to me personally. Also, women in the Department of Agriculture in Oregon make up 49.5% of our employees. Again, I'm super proud of that fact. We are diverse. We are a welcoming work environment. And as a department, we are, again, representative of all Oregon agriculture. And that's really exciting, but also very important. People want to connect. Consumers and want to connect to who are raising their food. And our farmers and ranchers want to connect to who are helping promote for them or regulating them as a sector. One other thing I really try to do within the department is really point out and recognize male leaders who report directly to me who are doing a good job of mentoring women on their teams. Again, to me, women are only half the equation. Having buy-in by men and male leaders in any organization is really critical. So I really try to acknowledge the men in our agency that do this really well and set that tone and that culture for my employees. Before I wrap up and really start to take some questions, I think there's a great quote I really want to leave everyone with that really I hope underscores the idea of why I think personally mentorship, whether formally or informally, is so important. And it is a quote from Sally Helderson, who is the general manager of a women-owned service and logistics company serving publishers, authors, and corporate audiences. She said, "Every once in a while, a pioneer comes along who breaks new ground, sets a new path forward, but for most of us, we need tracks to follow, idols to imitate, mentors to pursue." So I'd really like to challenge all of you to ask someone to be your mentor or to seek out a mentee. Maybe bring them to this conference next year with you. Somewhere in your life, there's a woman is watching you and looking to you for an example, whether you know it or not. And I hope we really take that on as we walk out of here and what the opportunities might be for helping the next generation see different paths forward into leadership roles. I really want to say thank you again to our sponsors and to WSU for hosting this, to Margaret and her team for putting this on. I think it is a great and really important conversation to have, one that is near and dear to my heart. And I really look forward to the rest of the conference today. I think the agenda looks very exciting, and I'm excited to go be able to participate in a little bit of it once I wrap here. So I spoke a little faster than I had anticipated, so we've got a little bit more time for questions. So Margaret, I would love to take some questions to see what's on people's minds.
Well, one question that we have is some women say, all I really want to do is farm. I'm just happy being on my farm and doing what I had planned to do. And so stretching myself and doing something different is a big stretch, you know, and then I have to give up something on my farm. So how do you suggest that a little bit more about how women slowly get involved and start to make a difference where they don't feel like they've let go of a big part of their farming operation to be more involved?
Yeah, that's a great question. You don't have to jump in day one and try to become a member of the board of a commodity organization you're a member of. Maybe it's just becoming a member to start. And once you're in that formal organization, then you can start networking. We as women are natural networkers. A couple of the examples I used from the idea of amplification in the White House to my friend and mentor in the large agribusiness that got together ahead of time. That's because women are natural networkers and they want to come together. And so just the first thing you can do is become a part of an organization. Being part of that, your voice is going to be heard whether you're in a leadership role or not. You can start slowly to be part of that conversation, making sure we're thinking about they're thinking about different aspects, different angles, because like I said, women do bring that unique voice and that unique perspective, but we're half the world and half the United States. So I think, yes, it's one more thing that people don't have time for, but really trying to prioritize it. You are, a peg or a building block that slowly more and more women build upon. And someday maybe we don't have to have these types of conversations, but we do today because our voices aren't there equally. And I think it can be a slow progression. And what I really think is women get involved, they see the value that they bring, and then they realize that it does need to be prioritized amongst all the other things that they have to do in any given day when they're trying to raise a crop, raise animals. That's a full-time job. That's probably 2 full-time jobs rolled into one.
So to play on that, another question came in is how do I appear not to be a pushy broad, as we sometimes get called in organizations when I go in and ask questions that I don't know and people kind of look at me weird?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one thing is finding your leadership style and what works for you. I have never adopted anyone's leadership style exactly. What I have tried to do is look at bosses And I have decided in a lot of areas, I said, okay, that's not the kind of boss I want to be. I want to be a different boss, because those are the aspects of leadership style that I don't want to adopt. So part of it is identifying what works for you and your voice. I think we just have to also acknowledge that it's okay to ask questions, and there aren't dumb questions. I mean, I really do believe that, because part of having women in leadership as part of conversations is we view things differently. And so we may ask questions that the men kind of scratch their head and say, why does it, no one would care about that. But the point is half the population does care about it. And that's why we're asking, because we think it matters as women. So I think part of it's finding your own leadership style, finding what works for you, being off, I hate the word authentic, but really finding your own voice and not trying to, imitate others that you have seen be successful. One of my mentors is a former deputy secretary at USDA, Krista Harden. She really started this idea at USDA that I got really the privilege to pick up when she left, about women in agriculture. But she is a farm girl from the South. The way she approaches things, the way she talks about it, that's not me. I'm, a farm girl from Iowa. And so I would never talk about it those types of ways, but I saw a lot of her consensus building that I was able to adopt. There were lots of things I wasn't, because it would just sound very strange coming out of my mouth. So I think it's about finding what works for us. You can look to male and female leaders on what worked for them, on things you would like to do and things you wouldn't like to do. But really, I think it's about partly about also just showing up, because it might be that really hard to be that first woman in the door, but think about the second woman in the door. She's going to be more comfortable and have an easier time because you're there. And so it's hard to be that first woman, but it's really important to be that first woman too.
Thank you. So I made a comment based on some issues that Wisconsin Farm Bureau had mentioned, that we should call ourselves coming from farms and not from operations. Well, one of our sites asked the question about men always talk about their operation, because maybe operation sounds more impressive than a farm. And do you feel that women would not fit in if they called themselves a farm versus an operation, and they might sound too amateur?
No, I don't think so. I think, again, it's about finding the verbiage you're comfortable with. I often use producers because I'm trying to talk in Oregon about farmers, ranchers, and honestly, fishermen and women. So farmers, fishers, and ranchers, or producers is kind of the shortened version of it. I guess I don't call the operators, I usually don't use that term. I would use producers, but I think you need to find the terminology that works for you, that you feel comfortable with, because if you don't feel comfortable calling yourself an operator, it won't feel, it will come across that you don't feel comfortable that. If you're a farmer and want to call yourself a farmer, call yourself a farmer. But you're also, I think one thing that we need to think about as well, you're also a small business owner. And that's an important component, whether you call yourself a farmer, a rancher, an operator, a producer, all of those are small business owners. And that's an important part, because you're contributing to the economy as well.
So I have a two-part question. What have you done to encourage women of color and other types of diversity in Oregon? And along with that is, how are you addressing the racial, ethnic diversity of staff members and reaching out to women of color?
That's a great question. And it's not something I talked about, but it is something I have really taken on my time here in the 10 months I've been on the job here in Oregon. So I have 23 commodity commissions that I are director appointed. So I appoint the commissioners. One of the things I've really spent a lot of time with them over the past 10 months to talk to them about the value of diversity. Diversity is a lot of things in Oregon. It is race, it is gender, it is sexual orientation, it's regional diversity, it's age, and probably many other things as well that I'm forgetting. But diversity is really important. And so I've been talking to them, and one thing I have worked with my staff on is really zeroing in 5 commodity commissions we're specifically targeting this year to increase diversity. Next year, we'll do another 5. I would love to say I have the bandwidth to do all 23 the first year to target, but I don't. And so really being pragmatic and targeted to them. So I've been hitting them individually, discussing it with them individually. We're working with the governor's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office and her policy advisors there to connect to communities of color in Oregon. One of the things each of the commodity commissions have are public members. So, you know, we've been talking to one of them about maybe trying to find a chef from a community of color because they're creating a food product that then they could hear how chefs might use it in some of the urban settings and think about marketing that way. And so we're definitely looking at it that way from the commodity commissions that I directly appoint. You know, one of the things I'm really proud of is the Potato Commission. They've been around for 40 years. They had never appointed a woman. And it had only been men on their board up until this point. And they were one of my targets, talking about increased diversity. And I got to appoint the first woman last month. So it's super exciting. They're buying in and they're saying there's a value here. They understand why it's a value to me. It's a value to the governor in Oregon. And they're really buying in. The other thing I'm doing within the department is, again, working with the governor's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office and her policy advisors as we have job announcements, sending them to her staff, because they have a lot of connections to different communities of color in Oregon and different minority organizations to be able to connect. So we're trying to send out our job announcements to different groups and different populations that maybe we traditionally have not been as connected to. And that goes from, you know, the entry-level job all the way up to, we've got a couple senior level positions. We're going to be rolling out job announcements here, hopefully very soon, and target and really working that non-traditional angle for the department. So it is something that I am putting an emphasis on all across what I think I can kind of influence and touch.
Okay, thank you. So earlier in your presentation, you quoted something, and I think I was answering a question online and I didn't hear the quote, and a couple of sites asked you to repeat that quote.
Oh, yes. It was at the beginning or the end?
Beginning.
Oh, I think I did a quote at the beginning.
Okay, well, the site that asked that, please ask me again, and we'll take care of that. So another question was, how would you go about working with a boss who doesn't see women as equals?
That's a great question.
That's a loaded question.
And you know, I've been very lucky. I have not had that issue, as I've had all male bosses up until this point. I have not had that issue. I have had very forward-thinking, very progressive male bosses in my career that it was not an issue. You know, one of the things I look at when I worked at USDA, I worked for Secretary Vilsack, the former secretary of USDA. And, you know, when the story about president amplification in the White House came out, I really had to self-reflect and say, wow, I've never needed that here. My voice has always been valuable to the secretary. It was never, I never felt like I had to do, you know, workarounds to have my voice or my perspective be heard. But I guess for the women, I would say, who do work in an organization maybe, and they feel like, you know, their male boss or the leadership who are male maybe don't see, that don't think women's voices are equal. I think, again, it's unfortunate, but it's the world we live in today, to find those creative approaches to having your voices be heard, whether it's the idea of amplification, whether it's getting together ahead of time, to hash out your issue, to hash out and hammer out all the places you might disagree with other women on the team, or whether it's engaging men on the senior team who maybe don't have that same perspective and working with them to make sure your perspective and your voice is still being heard. Again, short term, that's not great, but the hope is the long term, it changes that culture.
Thank you. So another question came in is, who are two of your current or most influential mentors?
So one certainly would be Krista Harden, who is the former deputy secretary at USDA. She was chief of staff to Secretary Vilsack when I came to USDA. She's honestly the reason I went to USDA. I was not looking to make a career move at that time. I was working for a Montana senator. We were halfway through what became the 2014 Farm Bill in the Senate. And I wasn't really interested in it. But she came to me, and so she hadn't thought, we really have a gap here in expertise. We're going to be writing a farm bill soon because Congress is going to pass it. We need someone, and bringing on and she was intentional also to really go out and look for women. And so she has long been a mentor of mine. When I got the job offer to come to Oregon, I wasn't looking to move to Oregon. I was looking to move closer to my family in the Midwest. And she's someone I sat down with and talked the pros and cons to. So she has long been more of an informal mentor, but certainly a mentor in my career. I would say another very influential mentor would be former Secretary Tom Vilsack. In that I mentioned in my speech that the last year of my time at USDA, I had received a promotion to take over the Farm and Foreign Agricultural Services. One of the things, there were people in the USDA leadership who did not think I was ready. They thought I was young, hadn't had enough management experience. Obviously, it's a huge job. You have 14,000 employees. And they actively were talking, internally, obviously, they had interviewed many candidates that they didn't think I was ready. But the secretary said, no, she is. She wants this job. I've seen the type of work she can do. I have no doubt she's ready for this challenge. And he is one of those also informal mentors, but who really gave me opportunities, pushed me. I worked very closely for him for 4 years. He pushed me to be better, to think more critically, to be more creative, all of the things that made me, ready for that job, ready for this job. But he also, when the opportunities came, he was willing to give me the shot. And someone, when we were talking about, right with the press shop right before it was announced, our communications director at USDA at the time said, oh, will you be, you're probably one of the only women to have ever held this role. And I said, yes, I am. And he said, oh, I'm probably the youngest. And I laughed and I said, by about, 2.5, 3 decades. Yes, I'm the youngest. So, the secretary was willing to say he had seen me work, my age, my gender didn't matter. He knew I could do the job. Likewise, when I got this job, he had been a governor before he was Secretary of Agriculture. He had a cabinet. And he really formally sat down with me and said, here is, from a governor's perspective, what you can do, how you can really be successful. So again, taking that opportunity to sit down with me and give me his advice has really been, I think, really important in this career move.
Thank you. So I want to thank all the sites. We have many questions coming in, and those that we can't get answered in the next few minutes, I will share those with Alexis, and maybe she can do some written comments to them, because we have several that are still open right now. But one that we have in federal or state support farm agency programs, are they steady, or do you think they're diminishing?
For women? Is that the...
Well, we'll start, we could start with women, programs for women to through the farm agencies, and for farming, loans. Mm-hmm.
So I would say, USDA was, when I was there, we prioritized, making loans to women, to minorities, to veterans, to people who are maybe more traditionally underserved. We actually had internal targets that we were working towards to every year increase and push ourselves to connect to maybe our non-traditional lendees. I certainly, as I talk to some of the individuals who are taking over state leadership, at least in Oregon, I think that's going to continue. I think there is an acknowledgement that farming and ranching across the United States is very diverse, and that the programs USDA has needs to be able to target everyone, maybe not just my father's generation of farmers who looked a very different way. I think one of the other things, and you mentioned this, Margaret, is around NASS. NASS has actually they've made some changes to their survey that they're going to do to be able to really capture more women doing more activities on the farm. They're actually going to ask down to the 5th operator. Right now, or in the last census, they only asked down to the 3rd operator, so the top 3 operators. And what the thinking is, and the hypothesis is, a lot of women, they're like, well, I'm just helping out, even though they're actively farming. Well, I'm just helping with the marketing decisions, even though that's a core part of the farming. And so they're not checking themselves. So the hope is to do the 5 primary operators, that they actually can capture more women. And so that 1 million operators is actually going to be much larger after the 2017 census. That's the hope. So I think USDA will continue to push and acknowledge that. At the department, our role is, and the types of programs we have are a little different. We obviously don't have the same programs as the federal government, but I would say we will continue to press to serve what agriculture is in Oregon and our farmers, ranchers, and fishers. And that diversity, we're nearly 40% of women farmers in this state. And so we're going to continue to make sure our programs serve all of them.
Okay. Another question is, a lot of women prefer working with men or male bosses because of the competitive nature of women that they sometimes work with. Have you experienced or witnessed anything like this?
I have. I've certainly witnessed it. And I think that is a very unfortunate culture. Bringing more, and a culture I have certainly tried to break. I have been very intentional when I have hired my chief of staff at USDA, it was going to be a woman. Not because there weren't great men out there, there absolutely were, but because I think we as women leaders need to change the culture and set the culture that it's not competitive. Me bringing along women and giving women new opportunities in senior roles doesn't diminish me as a woman. It makes me a stronger leader. And so I think I have seen it. I hope that culture is changing. And I think the collective we need to make sure we change it. And when we see something like that, point it out that that's not acceptable.
Okay. Another question goes back to people of color and trying to move into a community, purchase land, become involved in farming. That sometimes it's intimidating to do that. And let's see, another question that follows along with that is, gotta get up here. And so, and then along with that is also in your own staff, how do you balance your team with men and women so that men don't feel that you're discriminating against them? But let's talk about the color first of all. Women of color trying to break into farming. We know from the statistics, at least in Washington State, the number of women of color who own and operate farms or trying to get into farming is the proportion is probably not even equal to the proportion of minority.
Yeah. It is even in Oregon, when you talk about diversity, you have to, it becomes diversity for, gender or age, becomes much easier when you look at just the population. Diversity of color becomes much smaller. And so you may be the only minority moving into a community to farm. I think the way that I would suggest, to a woman of color who's trying to farm in a community maybe that doesn't look like her, is to seek out mentors. I guess that is probably a running theme here, is to seek out actual formal mentors. And they might not be minorities themselves, because there might not be any other farmers or ranchers of color around, but trying to find like-minded individuals, people who can help you navigate that traditional farming stronghold, and to really cement yourself in the community, I think is one way. I think the other way is to find organizations that you can become active in. One, that can help you identify some of those mentors, but two, then you become really part of that community. I think those are two ways that I would recommend a woman of color who's getting into farming, and to really try to branch out to find those mentors, because I think that's the way to really be successful. But then also there are many great organizations out there in states and across the country who are representative of minority farmers or ranchers, and then becoming maybe part of a larger national organization, that there are then you have those networks and those resources to talk about some challenges that will be very unique, that someone in your community as a mentor might not be able to help you navigate.
Okay.
And what was
so another question? Excuse me.
Oh yeah, what was
another is where would you direct young girls, in high school or beginning in college, to get an agricultural education before they graduate?
Well, so in Oregon, we've got a couple great programs. We have Ag in the Classroom. There's 130 something teachers across the state who are ag educators. That's very exciting. We're also agriculture in the classroom is also part of the CTE, Career Technical Education. And so students have that ability to really get their hands dirty in farming or ranching, and learning certain practices and techniques, and to really experiment to see if that's what they're interested in. There's also, there are lots of organizations, FFA, 4-H. I think those are wonderful organizations. We didn't have FFA in my school, but I was a member of 4-H growing up, as was my sister. So again, great opportunities there. And then, oh, my lights went off. Sorry, they're motion censored. So they're back on. And then the other point, sorry, I got distracted with the lights. I had one more point and I don't remember it now. Sorry. It's about asking for internships. I think there's a lot of great opportunities out there, and sometimes they might not be formalized. I had a woman, OSU student, who I had met a few times in different forms through FFA, through a College of Ag, OSU event that I did. And she just approached me and said, "Do you guys offer internships? I'm really interested about learning from you, learning what the department does." She's an intern at the Oregon Department of Agriculture right now. So I think if you want to be a farmer, ask a farmer in your community if they need an intern, and you can get some on the hands experience. If you're interested in learning about, logistics and moving food or produce from point A to point B, ask a logistics company in your area. The worst they can say is no. The best they'll say is yes, and you'll have a great experience, and you might learn that's not what you want to do, and you may find your life passion and realize that is what you want to do.
Thank you. Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time, and we're going into our break time at all of our sites, and we have several other questions that I know that the sites have asked. I will share those with Alexis. We'll get some answers, and we'll let you know how they'll be posted on our website so that you can see those. And as two parting comments is, it was the quote from Sally Hellerson that you had that you could share with me, and we could post that as well, unless you can tell us in just a moment what that was. The second thing is it was recommended that you do a TED Talk on the things that you've talked about today.
I will definitely share you, I will email you the Sally Hellerson quote, and I will duly note it about doing a TED Talk. So.
Okay, we want to thank you very much for joining us today. I know that you're busy, and the Salem site is going to be happy that you're going to join them for part of their program and also for lunch. And so I'm sure you'll get lots of questions from them, because several came in from that site as well. So once again, we thank you. Thank you for being part of our program today, and we'll talk soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Thanks to everyone.
And I think you can leave the meeting, on your computer, if that's what you want to do. Thank you. And so we'll take a break at all of our sites and then we'll come back. There'll be a time clock that goes up, but we have about a 5-minute break, so you'll have to take your break as you see, as it best fits with you, because our next speaker will be starting soon.
This is They're going to return in 1 minute.
Okay, I want to call the sites back. We're ready to start with our next speaker. And this is Margaret again at the Wenatchee site. And I would like to introduce you to Ann Schwartz. She is the owner and operator of Blue Heron Farms since 1979 in the Skagit Valley. And she's been a certified organic farm since the very beginning when she started. Her career is very much rooted in activism. She knows how to inspire women to develop and renew their leadership roles, and she walks the talk and all the leadership things that she's done. She's a graduate of Washington State University. She serves on many Washington State University committees, namely the kitchen cabinet for at least 3 deans through the Connors College. And she's also on the Northwest Agriculture Research Foundation since 2001. She was the first woman and the first organic farmer in this 70-year-old organization. So as you know, she's going to be able to talk about some of the things that she's done and how to make a difference in the community that she's been in. She's also been honored as the Hall of Fame for Women of Distinction for Women of the Year at Washington State University. She'll talk about her setbacks, she'll talk about her successes and how she motivates herself, and also how she takes care of herself, because that's what we also need to hear about as women farmers and all the activities that we're involved in. So Ann will be on the program for about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll have time for questions and answers. And once again, I'll help her keep track of the time. And I know we'll have many more questions than what we can answer. And like with the last speaker, we'll certainly answer those questions after the fact, and you'll get the answers. So Ann, welcome to the Women in Ag Conference. And I know you're going to tell us more about your experiences as you go along. And so I've kept the introduction short so that you can do that as well. So welcome to our sites.
Thank you very much, Margaret. It's a real pleasure to be here, although it is an interesting juxtaposition to be looking at a computer screen instead of a room full of people. But I'm honored to be here with you today, and I very much appreciated all of Alexis's comments, and they definitely set the stage. I grew up in New Jersey from a non-agricultural background, and grew up in the 1960s and 70s. I graduated from high school in 1972. And I was very much influenced by Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, the first Earth Day, and the growing awareness of environmental issues. The Vietnam War was certainly a critical part of my classmates' time. And the growing women's movement and civil rights issues were all critical things that influenced me as a teenager. Growing up in New Jersey, I was surrounded by oil refineries and petrochemical companies. And at the time, much of the solid waste field was owned by organized crime. And so that meant there were a number of environmental disasters that were constantly being hushed up. I started going to Rutgers University in the early 70s at the College of Ag and Environmental Sciences. And Rutgers did it interesting. They put ag and environmental sciences together. So we had a tremendous influence by the study of ecology and a whole range of different students. When I came to Washington State University, the College of Ag was with the Department of Home Economics, and it was a very different kind of place to come. My goal was to get into veterinary medicine, and I was growing unhappy enough in New Jersey that I started looking around for where else I might go. I had family on the West Coast, and there were more vet schools on the West Coast. So I headed west and arrived in the Skagit Valley in Washington State in 1975, got my residency, and moved to Pullman to finish my degree in animal science and see what I could do to make a difference. Moving to the Palouse in the mid to late 70s was a very different experience. I wound up renting a house with other animal science students outside of town. And so I had the opportunity to drive through the Palouse to classes back and forth every day. And back in the 70s, the average soil loss from soil erosion from the farming practices there ranged from 25 to 50 tons per acre. And it was quite a sight in the spring to see the snowplows pushing all of the soil off the roads rather than the snow. In the meantime, I was sitting in my ag econ classes learning about cost benefit and the ability for these growers to leverage more and more debt because their values of their land was increasing so much and demand for small grains around the world was increasing. And they were justifying this amazing soil loss that seemed to me to fly in the face of what economics should be doing. I also, in studying animal sciences, started to really learn about modern animal production and how confined animal feeding operations were really transforming how livestock was raised. The Secretary of Agriculture at the time was Earl Butz, and he became famous for his words of get bigger, get out, tear out the fence rows, lock the critters up, plow more ground, and start exporting. All of these things had a huge influence on me, and I found myself wondering, how is it that our economics justify what I saw as many problems with the direction that modern agriculture was taking? When I started at WSU, I was definitely a meat eater, and when I finished at WSU, I found myself not wanting to support that system that caged animals for their entire life cycles. And I found myself pulled to dairy science because it turns out that dairy cows, when they're under a lot of stress, don't make as much milk. And so as I studied the various livestock and animal sciences classes, I found myself being pulled more and more to dairy science. And so that was a focus as I graduated from Washington State University. I didn't get into veterinary medicine, and I found myself back in the Skagit Valley, got a job for a dairy farmer and worked for this dairy farmer for about a year and a half. And I found my niche. I loved the cows. I loved the dairy. I loved learning how to do everything that needed to happen, learning how to drive trucks and tractors and raise the calves and put up feed. I loved every bit of it. And I would have stayed with dairy science, but I married a forester. And so we went a different direction as we found our own little piece of heaven in the Skagit Valley. Then I found myself starting to work with the folks at Cascadian Farm, which became one of the largest organic farm organizations in the United States, and went to my first Tilth producers meeting. And going to that meeting was really quite an amazing experience for me, meeting people that were working as hard as I was working, that were disillusioned with the direction that modern agriculture was taking, that wanted to think about issues of sustainability and how we might leave things better than we found them. And that really appealed to me. I also found myself in a small community with quite a bit of medical background. My husband and I both decided to join our local fire department and became EMT firefighters. And I'm proud to say we are still EMT firefighters, and that's been since 1980. So about 37 years we've been responding in our local fire department. And for me, I found it to just be a marvelous way for as a newcomer to find my way in my community, to give to my community, to become respected in my community, and to know how to help and to build my self-confidence in that we can make a difference in our communities. I had, like I said, been starting to go to some of these Tilth producers meetings. I immediately started volunteering. I didn't start slow. I jumped right in and joined the board. And then along the way, started being able to work with different Washington State University Extension people that were trying to do some small farm programs and sustainable ag programs. And these WSU Extension people were just phenomenal to work with and created many, many opportunities for us to learn how to serve our constituency and how to develop as an organization. That led to the development of organic standards, and several of us that were involved with TILF pushed hard to develop a definition for organic in Washington State. Washington State became the first state agency to certify organic farms. And then we started working with Oregon TILF and the California Certified Organic Farmer organizations to harmonize our standards on the West Coast. The same effort was going on really around the planet. The East Coast and the Midwest had several organizations that were looking to develop standards and write regulations to create a true meaningful definition of what organic agriculture was about. It was going on across Europe, and there were many opportunities to start meeting people around the United States and working with them to push to create this legislation. Along the way, there were many opportunities to start working with Washington State University. Several of us were instrumental in creating legislation to create the Center for Sustaining Agriculture and Natural Resources. And I've had the pleasure and honor of serving on that advisory board since we created that back in 1981. And I'm very proud of the many accomplishments that the Center for Sustaining Ag has achieved at Washington State University. We certainly had a rocky road to get going, and many people didn't understand why we needed such a center. But over time, we've attracted more and more faculty that are looking at doing work that focuses on biological control methods for farm pests and diseases, as well as creating funding opportunities to create this kind of research. Along the way, there were also opportunities to work with a number of deans, and these opportunities have just been tremendous in my life. I value every one of them. I value the opportunity to have met and worked with farmers from all the different crop commodities across Washington State. We're a very diverse state like Oregon. The difference in climate between the west side and the east side and the difference in water means that our agriculture is very complex, and it requires a lot of voices to help guide policy and programs and research and teaching opportunities. So in addition to the working with Washington State University on various advisory committees, and I served on the first organic advisory board with the Washington State Department of Agriculture. And then I chaired a national committee to develop livestock standards for the federal rule for the Organic Food Production Act, which we passed in 1991. But it was a decade before all the rules were written and the programs were set up. And the opportunities to work with committed people from across the United States has been something that life experience that I will always cherish. I don't miss jumping on a plane and flying to DC as much as I used to go, but for 8 or 9 years, I spent a lot of time in Washington, DC, and I'm so blessed to have met the kinds of people that I've met and learned about how our food system runs and functions at the federal level. I took advantage of an opportunity offered by Resources for the Future to spend a leadership development program in Washington, D.C. in 1991. I spent a whole month there, and it was like my 4-year education in college, all wrapped into 4 weeks in our nation's capital. And that had an enormous impact on how I understood our food system and how I understand what we need to do to try to make changes to improve the sustainability and access of a truly sustainable food program. So I'll just talk real quickly about what is important to me, and I'll give a disclaimer that I'm an obsessed and possessed person. I have been happy to spend a huge amount of my life as a volunteer, and fortunately I have a partner. My husband has very much supported it. We're both volunteers. He's a school board member, and he's been a fire commissioner in our community. And we both still know that volunteering is something that has really enriched our lives. So who am I as an activist? Well, I want to pay close attention to environmental issues and protection of soil and water resources and our natural resources. I've had a lot of impact from my readings of author Wendell Berry, and Wendell Berry has put so many of his radical ideas in print that there's no limit to how much you can challenge your brain to think about a regenerative kind of agriculture, a sustainable kind of agriculture. Wendell Berry speaks very well about an agrarian lifestyle, and I found that I personally need to live in a small rural community. I grew up 25 miles from New York City. I didn't want to live in an urban area anymore. I wanted to live in a rural area. I wanted to contribute to my community, and I wanted to get along with all my neighbors. I was, again, back to livestock systems. I believe that grass is one of the great healers for our soil. And I believe that most livestock do best on grass-based raising systems. They're finding more and more information about the difference that eating a when a cow eats a grass-based diet versus a grain-based diet, the meat in the milk is actually healthier, has higher levels of omega-3s and 6s, and is actually being found to reduce heart disease. So as I've talked with farmers throughout the area, that we've always looked at grass as being one of the great parts of a rotation, a critical part of a rotation to keep our soils healthy. So I've become a cheerleader for grass-based farming systems. And that has nothing to do with organic, really. And most of the growers around me know, whether they grow potatoes or bulbs or seed crops, that grass is a critical piece of that puzzle. And the best critters to digest grass are livestock and make better use of it. So one of my goals is to repopulate the landscape with livestock farms, which will help make our agriculture a more balanced, fundamentally serving our soils and communities better. I also believe very strongly that we can't afford to lose any more farmers. We're down below that magic 1% where it's not even included as a census category anymore. And Alexis was absolutely right, or Margaret, about how important it is to fill out these census surveys. And so I'll stand behind Margaret and say, yes, we all need to fill out these surveys when they come in the mail. So my goal today is to inspire you to leave your farm a little more than you might want to and share your experience with others. And I want to inspire you to build your skills and capacity to contribute where you can and to empower others to get involved. And now I'll start my slides if I can figure out how to advance. Still trying to figure out, okay. So How do we start? So many challenges that we face in agriculture and our rural communities. I believe the world needs a little more of you. Agriculture needs advocates to support family farms, to keep rural America thriving, to protect our natural resources. We can't do this alone. We have to work together, and it is very amazing what we can accomplish when we can work together. I think it's important to follow your passions and your interests as you consider where you might get involved. I like to suggest that people start with volunteering for an event. Here in the Skagit Valley, we have a Festival of Family Farms that always needs volunteers. We have our Tulip Festival that always needs volunteers. So these events like this, something that's organized by other people that has a firm start and ending date, can always benefit from extra bodies and brains. So that's a great way to find a little place to jump in. You get to start meeting people. You get to start figuring out where they need help. And I guess I would suggest that you do it more than once, because maybe something goes wrong the first time you do it and you get a little disillusioned and you think, maybe I'm not going to do that again. Don't stop with your first experience. Find something else if that first one didn't work well for you. Skagit Valley, like much of the farmland in Western Washington and Western Oregon, is under tremendous development pressure. We definitely need to do all that we can to protect our farmland. And one of the best ways to protect our farmland is to make sure that farmers are profitable. If farmers aren't profitable, it's not going to help to save the farmland. We've got to keep the farmers attached to the farmland. I would suggest if you start volunteering somewhere, do it in the off season. We're all busy. Don't do it. Don't jump in the middle of the farming season. Now is a great time. We're at a conference. It's November. You'll get through the holidays. See what else might pique your interest, and find a way that you might jump in and do something small. If you already volunteer for an organization, bring new folks along. Ask somebody else to help out for an event. One of the things that I have found with Extension over the last 35 years is they've done a great job of offering leadership skill workshops. And I probably went to a dozen of these over the last 30 years that were very instrumental in helping me bridge the gap of this non-farmer coming from an urban area who's full of opinions and passion and is kind of shaking things up. You know, I needed to learn how to manage that in my life of activism. So leadership skills are just so important, and I think this is an area that Extension can really shine in, and that we need to push our communities to do that more, because Extension certainly is underfunded and under-supported as our government changes how they support regional extension systems. I want to assure you that some of what resonates with you will resonate with others. And assume that if you have some questions, other people will share those questions. It's very unusual that what you're thinking isn't being shared by somebody else in the room. There may be people that disagree, but there will be people that agree with you. So I want to urge you to give yourself permission to express your concerns and ask your questions. You will also be more effective if you understand your learning and communication styles and what motivates you. And then I'll urge you all to practice the leadership skills in a friendly crowd where people want you to succeed. Next slide. So this is part of my crew. I'm missing one critical person here, but I farm about 8 acres of vegetables and a couple acres of fruit. And I've had just the best team I could possibly have hoped for. My crew for the last few years has made farming a joy. And this is a snapshot at the end of the year. We had one of those really warm days. We'd already frosted a few times. So there's not much in the way of crops left, but it shows our smiling faces and a great crew, a great team. So how do we do this? How do we possibly take on more than we're already doing? As women, we're juggling taking care of our family, our marriages, our children, personal health issues, certainly personal health challenges, and the demands of our businesses. And we have to really consider what our choices are and what feeds us personally, in our business, and in our community. Like I said, I'm a bit obsessed, and I've done maybe too much volunteering in my life. But as I've struggled with this notion of balance, this is what has guided me. The key really is understanding what feeds us, and then taking the time for all three at the right time and at the right opportunity. One of the issues that really comes up is self-confidence, and the confidence to go out and do something and take all those labels that men might give us or that other women might give us. My upbringing was with a mom that was definitely about being a peacemaker, avoiding conflict at all costs, and being conciliatory. So even though it isn't really how I describe myself, I do see that in myself more often than I might have. I'm surprised at how often I see it in myself, actually. And it's no secret that men still dominate much of agriculture. And in my experience, I have found sexual harassment to be part of agriculture. As a self-employed farmer for most of my adult life, I haven't had to deal with this from a boss perspective, but certainly from the perspective of belittling and being in circles where men dominate the conversation. I certainly remember my days in Washington, D.C. of standing up to tall, big men with big belt buckles. And I used to think about myself as nose to belt because I'm kind of short, and I didn't come from agriculture, so I've had a lifetime of learning to just get caught up to people that are raised in agriculture. And I can't tell you how many times I've had a man tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. So you do have to be able to stand up to that. And you do have to be able to develop your self-confidence to be assertive and outspoken, and to be confident in your ability to make a difference and to help move the conversation along. I don't have the benefit of sitting in a room full of women to ask this question directly, but it did occur to me because we're in this time of Me Too. We're in this time of new pieces on the news every single day of men making life more challenging for women. And that's not going to go away with agriculture where we are yet. Hopefully in the future it will. But as you're sitting in your groups, I guess I would ask you all to take a minute and look around the room. And, you know, if you've had to deal with men treating you poorly, raise your hand. Identify yourselves. Because probably, and maybe it's not all of us, and maybe most of you have not had to deal with that, but maybe some of you have. And maybe some of you haven't known how to deal with it, and maybe it's shut you down, and maybe it's made you go home and not want to come back out again and just stay at your farm and take care of things where people aren't going to attack you for being an outspoken broad. So, one of the little things along the way that I saw that really inspired me is a quote that there's no limit to what we can accomplish if no one takes the credit. And that really resonated with me. I believe everything that happens with we, and very little happens with I. So look around, help everybody around you achieve what they're hoping to achieve. In your packet, you have long 2 pages, both sides of the Lominger competency list. And this was something that was shared with a group. I participated in an elders mentorship workshop at a conference a couple of years ago. And they distributed these Lominger competencies list before the conference, and we each got to look at this. And so I wanted to go over my areas, and then either this afternoon or over the next several days, go ahead and take this list and read through it carefully and pick out those things that resonate with you, and do an exercise of writing a paragraph or 2 about how these competencies speak to you. So I'll jump in, and here's me. I like to lay myself out on the table. Number 1, action-oriented, and I'll read what the description is. It enjoys working hard, is action-oriented, full of energy for the things he or she sees as challenging, not fearful of acting with a minimum of planning, seizes more opportunities than others. Well, that describes me to a T. I've been ready to jump in and roll up my sleeves since I was a young teenager, working at a local stable to pay for board so that I could keep a horse. And I've just been like that my whole life. Flipping the page over to number 29, integrity and trust. And I'll read again. Is widely trusted, is seen as direct and truthful, can present unvarnished truth in an appropriate and helpful manner, keeps confidences, admits mistakes, doesn't misrepresent herself for personal gain. These items are all very, very important to me, and I've tried to live them in my daily life all the way through. I like to be transparent. I want people to understand where I'm coming from. And I don't want to be a loose cannon, but I want people to really know the passion that drives me to do what I do. Flipping the page over to number 43, perseverance. This is also me to a T. Pursues everything with energy, drive, and a need to finish. Seldom gives up before finishing, especially in the face of resistance or setbacks. When we were drafting the first organic labeling law for Washington State, we were working with a state representative, Ken Jacobson, and he shared with us the 3 platforms of creating legislation: persistence, patience, and passion. And this notion of being there to bear witness, to come back if you don't succeed, to come back again, to find new partners, to figure out what didn't work. This also comes easily to me. And in some ways, some of these things can take you can give it so much of yourself to persevering that you can get yourself sick, and I'll come to that later on in my presentation. Jumping down to 49, presentation skills. The person is effective in a variety of formal presentation settings, one-on-one, small and large groups, with peers, direct reports, and bosses. Is effective both inside and outside the organization, commands attention and manage group process during the presentation, and can change tactics midstream when something isn't working. Along the way, at the various conferences and meetings that I attended as I was learning about agriculture, there were people that were so inspiring, it inspired me to want to learn how to do that. And so I took public speaking classes. I participated in small town theater to build my nerve to stand up in front of a group of people and try to get my point across. Presentation skills to me go a long way to inspiring people to try something they might not have tried before, to go someplace they might not have done, to do something different. And so presentation skills to me are something that I will continue to practice for my life because I've been so inspired by others. I hope to inspire people that come behind me. And the last one I'll refer to here is standing alone. And the verbiage that goes along with that is will stand up and be counted, doesn't shirk personal responsibility, can be counted on when times are tough, willing to be the only champion for an idea or a position, and is comfortable working alone on a tough assignment. And all I'll say on that is if you're trying to change how livestock are raised in this country, especially 30 years ago, you are standing alone. There's a lot of people that are standing behind you, but when push comes to shove, whether it's in the animal science department at Washington State University in 1979, or in Washington, D.C. in front of a Senate Ag hearing, standing alone is something that takes guts, and not everybody can do it. And if you think you can do it, then build on that because everybody needs people that will stand up and stand alone. So what areas might I pick for improvement? We'll go back to that page 1, number 11, composure. Is cool under pressure, does not become defensive or irritated when times are tough, is considered mature, can be counted on to hold things together during tough times, is not knocked off balance by the unexpected, doesn't show frustration when resisted or blocked, and is a settling influence in a crisis. Well, I've been in some tough situations where all I could do is find a private place and let the tears flow because I've gotten myself into some difficult situations. I've gotten myself into some conflicts that I didn't want to get there. So thinking about composure and practicing it and learning how to take those deep breaths has been one of my areas for improvement. Number 12, conflict resolution and conflict management. I went to a conference a couple of years ago, and there was a speaker there that was speaking to diversity and challenging new leaders to really consider conflict management as a critical skill to build. And it really resonated with me. We're at a time in our country where there's tremendous amount of conflict. And if we don't figure out how to come together, if we don't figure out how to listen to each other, we're not going to get where we need to go as a society and as certainly in our rural communities and where we're trying to create influence. Number 14, creativity. Comes up with a lot of new and unique ideas. Easily makes connections among previously unrelated notions. Tends to be seen as original and value added in brainstorming sessions. Creativity is not something necessarily that comes to me. I don't necessarily think fast on my feet. And I really admire those that do. So I look at how their brains work. I think about how their brains work. And sometimes I try to glom onto that. But my creativity can come when I'm sitting on a tractor or when I'm harvesting some vegetables or driving to market. Then I have time to really think things through and think about how to approach things differently. Number 34, managerial courage. This has been, I found myself in the last couple of years in some trying situations, and I realized that I didn't have as much managerial courage as I thought I did. I have courage to go up against strangers, but I don't necessarily have courage to go up against friends and people that I really respect. So that's been something that I've been looking at myself over. To just read the paragraph quickly. Doesn't hold anything back that needs to be said, provides current, direct, complete, and actionable, positive, and corrective feedback to others, lets other people know where they stand, faces up to people problems on any person or situation quickly and directly, and is not afraid to take negative action when necessary. This has been something that I've given a lot of thought to, and looking for opportunities to practice. When I was put with this in my role as a board member, this was a real challenge for me. And again, I looked to others that were better at this than I was for helping me grow in that endeavor. And the last one I'll just touch on for this particular session is patience. Number 41 is tolerant with people and processes, listens and checks before acting, tries to understand the people and the data before making judgments and acting, waits for others to catch up before acting, sensitive to due process and proper pacing, and follows established process. Again, when your goal is to change agriculture and your goal is to change your land-grant university, patience is absolutely required. So I'm not going to talk very much about this part of it because really these two pieces are whole weekend workshops. But I did want to just mention that it's important to know yourself. It's important to really understand your personality. How do you gain energy? Are you an introvert or an extrovert? Well, I like people, but it turns out, and maybe this is part of my aging, is I'm more comfortable in an introvert role. My husband is really an extrovert, and he loves meeting new people all the time. I'm finding myself kind of shrinking from that now, so it's interesting to just really evaluate where do you get your energy, and how do you process that? How do you gather information? Do you sense things? Do you think about things? Do you feel things? Where does it hit your body? How do you get all the information you need to keep your family together, to keep your farm functioning, to do your jobs? How do we process that information? I'm the kind of person that it comes in my ears, it maybe, travels through my brain a little bit, and then it goes into my heart. And then if I'm lucky, I can make it go through my brain again before it comes out of my mouth. So that's been my life goal, is to slow down how much time it actually spends in my brain. One of the things I've read along the way that I thought was interesting is that scientists have found white matter or brain tissue all throughout the gut. And so maybe there is more to going with our gut feeling than we ever knew, because maybe there's really parts of our brain that are processing all this information that actually live in our stomach, that actually live where we feel it across our whole body and not just in our mind. And then how do you make decisions? Do you judge? Do you perceive? Do you invite others? Do you incorporate? There's so many aspects to how we make decisions and how we communicate those decisions. And then bumping over to looking at our learning styles, verbal versus linguistic, logical versus mathematic, interpersonal and working with people versus intrapersonal and working on our own. I think about my other mentors out in the world. For those of you that have read things in sustainable agriculture, there's obviously Wendell Berry, there's Fred Kirschenman, there's John Eichert, there's Wes Jackson. There's many people across the country that have just done tremendous work. And there's some amazing women. Elizabeth Henderson, who farmed in New York State. Lynn Cody, who is in Oregon and farmed and has been working with the organic regulatory world for many, many years. The way that their brains work is something I've always really admired. And I don't really work like that, but I know if I'm in a group discussion with them, I'm going to learn from them and I'm going to watch how they process all this information. So what does agriculture need? I believe that we really need to look at sustainability and regenerative agriculture. I was at the TILT conference, TILT Alliance conference last week. Our keynote speaker was David Montgomery, who is a geologist at University of Washington. And he has now written 3 books on soils and how important it is that we protect our soils. One of the things that I've read about for many, many years, starting with Topsoil and Civilization that was published 30 years ago to David Montgomery's 3 books, is that as different civilizations destroyed their soil resources, those civilizations faded from existence. If we don't protect our soil, if we don't protect our ability to feed ourselves and our future, the world's future, we will fade. And we're running out of new soil to do that to. We've run out of new soil. So there's no more farmland to discover. It's been discovered. I believe we really need to ensure that farms survive and can weather all of the challenges that face us as we try to pass our farmland on and functioning businesses on to new generations. I believe that the more agricultural events that are sponsored will get more and more urban people out to the farm. I think that's absolutely critical. I find, even though I self-identify as an environmentalist, I personally have much more in common with the 10,000-acre wheat farmer in the Palouse than I do in an urban dweller that thinks they know a lot about food. So I believe agriculture events really are important to bridge the gap between how urban people understand where their food comes from. Having been involved with many regulatory issues and writing state and federal legislation and participating in, I guess, 5 or 6 farm bills now, the last 25, 30 years of farm bills, I find food and farming issues fascinating. I believe that we never stop learning about how our food comes, and we never stop being responsible to try to make things better. So I think it's critical that we engage the next generation into tracking and educating and responding to regulatory issues as they affect our food and agriculture. And I believe that we really need to stay engaged with research across the university and extension programs that link communities to agriculture. This is a picture of a meeting that happens every winter in my community. Most of the people in that room are farmers, and most of them are organic farmers. We all sell to our local Skagit Valley Food Co-op, and every winter we all get together to do some crop planning so that we're working together and not against each other. Some of the benefits to doing this is that we've been able to order packaging together. We've been able to bring our research needs out to the open. The co-op has helped with their fundraising efforts to help pay for critical research so that regional growers are able to produce more food that are sold in our regional grocery stores. So what do we need to do? Well, I mean, the focus of this conference is mentoring and how do we pass this on? We need to do as much as we can to bring the next generation of farmers and ag professionals along. As Alexis talked to, many women can find positions throughout agriculture, even if they don't want to be on a farm milking cows or harvesting vegetables. Again, I think that I want to take that challenge to develop skills to address conflict, to learn and share and engage and practice how to do that. At this conference that we worked on these Lominger competencies, one of the keynote speakers was an amazing young woman who's been involved with food issues for a few years. Her name is Nikki Silvestri, Nikkisylvestri, Nikki Silvestri. Google her when you get a minute. She's a brilliant speaker. She's very engaging, and she was the one that really challenged all of us to think about how we deal with conflict as we develop our leadership and as we push others to develop their leadership skills. We need to hear from the silent voices and the underrepresented, people of color, farm workers, people that haven't found their place in a rural area because all their neighbors are white and they're not comfortable. There's a lot of ways that we can go out of our way to broaden the conversation. And we need to promote careers in all areas of agriculture. As people get more and more divorced from agriculture, they don't think of agriculture as being an exciting place to invest their life energies. So this is one of my most wonderful mentees. She didn't come from a farm background, but she studied sustainable agriculture at Evergreen College. Her name is Jules Risk, and she married into a third-generation Skagit Valley farmer. She worked on my farm with me for 5 years and then helped me at market for several years. And my relationship with her and many other young people that have come through my farm has just been one of the real blessings in my life. So why volunteer? What are the benefits? Well, working with people on a common goal. As I introduced myself, my husband and I have been EMT firefighters for 35, 36 years, and being able to provide rural emergency services was just a great way to come into a rural community and build on what we have in common. And you leave politics at the door, it doesn't really matter. You're all there to help each other. Our community can flood. We can get major rain events, major snow events. When we all work together, we learn to depend on each other, and we're there when we need each other. And there's tremendous resiliency in that, tremendous value in that, tremendous value and quality of life. You get to build your personal strengths. You get to see what you're good at and what you're not good at, and let others that are better at other things fill in. You meet a broad cross-section of people that might be completely different than you, and those have been just incredibly valuable. Many years ago, I guess 2001, July 16th, our barn burned down. And it was a new barn. We had just finished it. My tractor was parked next to the barn. I had just harvested my most beautiful crop of garlic that I had ever grown. It was all sold. It was grown on contract. The fire started when I took an old fan and set it up to ventilate that garlic to help it dry. So that was devastating on many, many levels. And I struggled through the season. I didn't have the money or time to go out and find another tractor. I borrowed a friend's small tractor that really couldn't pull my equipment. And in the fall, I was complaining at a meeting I was at. It was actually a Northwest Ag Research Foundation meeting. And one of the farmers there said, "You need a tractor?" I said, "Yeah, but I don't have time to go buy one yet." He goes, "No worries. I'll have one at your farm tomorrow morning." At 8 o'clock the next morning, they were unloading a 55 horsepower tractor that got loaned to me by a large Skagit Valley farmer with no questions asked, no rental agreements. "Call me when you're done. We'll come get it." That farmer changed my life. And he's probably not listening today, but I've told this story enough that some of you might know him. And it certainly changed, it changed everything really about me. And it made a wonderful friendship. So getting through a crisis, you will have support and you will deepen your friendships, and you just don't know what inspires people to jump in and help. So one of the things that I wanted to say about volunteering is that we just don't know what all the benefits are, but they have enriched my life. They certainly complicated it, but they've also simplified it because I have friends and colleagues all around me that want me to succeed. So when you get stuck, what do? You check how the group process is working. You think about how you might use conflict resolution. You ask to hear from everyone. You are willing to explore different outlooks, different ways of thinking things through. It's always great to engage the group to self-monitor and own their own baggage. And if all else fails, bring in outside help. One of the places along the way that I've really tried to focus on is if you're sitting in a meeting with people, you get to raise your concerns once or twice, 3 times if you need to, but then you really need to use your comments that bring us to solutions. And that's always important to practice. I'm going to jump to this one and then go back. In 2009, I had my own little perfect storm of things that could go wrong. I had a major crop failure. I lost more money than I had ever lost before. I was working much harder than my crew, and I had issues with my crew. I had a major nematode problem. I had just finished investing many thousands of dollars to build an elk fence to keep the elk out of my farm. And the recession had really changed how many people were shopping at farmers markets. So our farmers market sales were way down. I got to the end of the season and I was fried. My hands were worn out. My body was worn out. My brain was worn out. I was burnt out and stressed out. And I was talking to my landlord because I rent my land. I don't own my farmland. And she challenged me to do something about it. So I happened to have a great counselor, and I liked the idea of a sabbatical year. I had been to another conference where some other farmers talked about scaling back for a year or two. So I went to my counselor and I said, I would like to craft a sabbatical year. And what does that look like? And these are some of the things that he suggested to me, and I've done them, and it's made an enormous difference in my life. So I wanted to share these rather quickly because I know I'm running out of time. Taking time for reflection. What I decided to do was take one morning a week to go to the river and sit for a half an hour. And that turned into being one of the best things I could ever do for myself. I even started having the crew come in late that day so that I could really be there for a half an hour, 45 minutes, and not stress out about the crew's going to be on the farm and I'm not there and I'm not going to answer my phone. So I managed to craft a way to take time for reflection. Keeping a journal. and asking yourself the question of what's working, what's not working, writing about that, thinking about what is balance in my life. You know, I'm a workaholic. I don't take enough time to take care of myself. And over the course of years, I suffered from insomnia, from migraine headaches, to ulcers, to just complete exhaustion. So one of the things that I did was, under his suggestion, was make a list of 20 things I love to do. And I keep that list on my bulletin board. I look at that list often. And one of the best benefits of creating that list is now whenever I do something on that list, I have given myself permission to do that because it's on my list. I mean, one of those things is petting my dogs. Sometimes I'd be too stressed out to stop and pet my dog. Well, I have border collies. How do you not pay attention to border collies? You've got to pay attention to border collies. And now it's like I can stop and pet my dog and I don't feel guilty about it. I know that I'm doing something that I love to do. So these things have stuck with me, and I have managed to get through every season since then in a great headspace. It's the middle of November. I'm not burnt out. I'm feeling great. I'm ready for a winter of finishing all my bookkeeping and taking care of all the things that I didn't do during the growing season. So the last slide I'm going to share here is about stress reduction. This is a short excerpt from a critical incident stress debriefing report. As EMTs, we've been on a number of critical incidents. The Rockport Fire Department was just about first on the scene from the Oso mudslide a few years ago. So that and other critical incidents is something that we have to pay attention to as medics and functioning in our community. So first thing, eat well and enjoy what you eat. Get enough rest. Do something that is personally satisfying to you. Get some exercise. And if you have to make a decision when you're in a really high stress time, don't choose an either or. Go for 3 or more alternatives if at all possible. So I figured I thought I would end with just a couple of farm shots late in the season, digging the last of the carrots. And I think there's a little cabbage under that remay, keeping the bugs off. This is part of my crew with winter squash harvest, getting it all off the ground on a nice day. For you food safety people, we invited the dogs into this picture. So you see a border collie next to my right leg, and there's a Kelpie next to my left leg. And where would we be without our farm dogs? I know you have to keep them off the farm, but they were just here for this one picture. And this is the little piece of paradise that I get to go home to every day. Sauk Mountain is right above the farm. This is a late fall shot, just looking across the cover crops and lack of leaves on the trees up at Sauk Mountain. And in the lower right, I've climbed to the other side of the valley. So that snow-covered peak is Sauk Mountain, and my little farm is that little patch of snow-covered ground in the middle right of the picture. Eastern Skagit Valley, town of Rockport, my own little piece of paradise. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ann. We have a couple questions coming in. I guess we lost your view here. There we go. Got you back. A couple questions coming in. One is, I'm kind of excuse me, I'm kind of in the mid-career of my life, and I've worked a lot on my farm, and you know, the gist of your talk was, excuse me, how do you make your mark in your community? So what do you suggest for somebody who's not brand new starting out, but more mid-career, getting a little tired, but now you're saying, you know, make your mark in your community, use those leadership skills or build some leadership skills. How do I get started?
Well, I think that, my first suggestion of finding an event that has a structured beginning and a structured end. So it isn't like you're signing your life away. I do love to volunteer. It has come back in many, many ways to reward my life. I encourage others to volunteer, especially if you're physically tired. It's a great way to exercise your brain. And you get to sit on your butt while you exercise your brain. So you do get to rest. But my advice is, if farmland preservation is something that's important to you, help out with a farmland preservation effort. If working with young people is something you want to do, go to your extension office and see where you might volunteer with an extension program that's coming up, because they always need help to pull off these events, and they're always doing outreach in their community. So tapping in to extension, to me, has always been a great way to get connected.
Okay, another question that we have is, I'm not quite ready to mentor. I don't feel that I have enough to mentor, and so how do I move into that mentoring to add something back to my community so I can make a mark? I've farmed for a while, and now I really have to give something back, but I don't know where to get started with this mentoring.
That's a great question. Well, I think one of the first things is to look at your skill set and look at that Lominger competencies list and read through that and see what resonates with you. And like I said earlier, we all have questions that overlap with people around us. We all have concerns that overlap with people around us. And in many ways, we mentor people without being aware that we're mentoring people. So I don't know that you need to go out and directly seek to mentor to start mentoring. I've been fascinated by agricultural policy since I was a student in college. And yet, with as many organizations as I've worked with, doing as many different issues as I have, I think I've really only had one woman pick up that kind of role from me. And we did formalize our mentorship relationship. But I've met a lot of people over a long time, and I might have influenced them to a career in agriculture, but not necessarily a career in ag policy. And so we just don't know who we're going to meet that we can mentor, but we certainly can continue to develop our skill set and address areas that we want to get better at. And I think in doing that, we build our self-confidence and we're in a better position to inspire others, whether we are a formal mentor or not.
So another question came in is, how do you suggest dealing with family or crew members who want to be part of the part of the farm, but are turned off by the workaholic, busybody lifestyle?
That's a good question. Well, I guess if you're going to be a farmer, I'm afraid I have bought into the notion that you have to be a workaholic. I don't know how to say that you can farm and not be a workaholic. Although one of the workshops I went to at the conference last week was by a small farmer who only wanted to work on his farm 2 days a week. He figured out how to do it. So I thought that was really interesting. I don't know if I could have figured that out, but he did. And he's an ag professional. He develops equipment on the side, and he wanted time to do writing and time to do equipment development. And so he crafted a very small farm so that he was just farming 2 days a week. So that's one way to do it, is just do some small enterprise that isn't a full-time commitment or a time and a half commitment, so that you can fit it in without being a workaholic. And I guess if you work as an ag professional, probably you have more of a Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 kind of a job, and you probably don't have to work quite so many hours with somebody that's actually farming. Does that answer that?
Sure. So briefly tell us what your definition of sustainable farming is.
Well, that people are still there farming, that rural communities survive, that the businesses that are necessary and critical for farm producers survive to serve them. Certainly, as I was learning about agriculture across the Midwest and studying agriculture in the 80s and learning about the farm crises, learning about the number of suicides that were going on through the Midwest, understanding what was happening to rural communities across the United States as we needed fewer and fewer farmers, and there were fewer and fewer businesses in towns and fewer schools and fewer hospitals. All of those losses don't paint a sustainable agriculture future. They certainly don't paint a rural America future. I think soil loss has to be addressed. I think that biological management systems are a piece of sustainable agriculture. So creating connections, protecting soil and water, making sure that our farmland is in as good a shape, if not better. We have to probably make our farmland in better shape if we're going to pass it down and continue to feed people. So sustainable agriculture is many things, but it is certainly about retaining as much wisdom of the land and of our food production knowledge as we possibly can. I lost your sound. Diane? Oh, are you back, Margaret?
Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay. So going back to the original concept of getting involved and using your leadership skills in the community, that sort of thing, and belonging to a group now that you consistently meet with, how would you engage or guide this group to self-monitor themselves, to kind of own their own baggage? And following along with what you recommended on the PowerPoint is owning your baggage, but also coming up with solutions rather than constantly or continually complaining.
Well, agriculture is very complex, and the more that we can learn about all of agriculture, the more that we can listen and learn from it and realize how complex it is. So I may have come into agriculture with a specific set of passions, but that is why I believe and I say I may be an organic farmer, but we can't afford to lose anything because we need all of us to survive to keep an agricultural system going. So learning where people are coming from and just listening and reading and understanding and paying attention to what all the different points of view are and getting to know people. I guess, that's one of the benefits of me being on my fire department has brought, because we leave our politics at the door. We're there to serve our community, and we're there to function as a team. And if that's what we're focused on, then we all have a lot more in common than we do differences. And when you really sit down and talk to people, we want much of the same things. We want to have enough to eat. We want a safe, secure place to sleep. We want to be healthy. We want our loved ones to be taken care of. We want opportunities for our children to do better. I mean, these are universal things that are spread across all of our people and have nothing to do with our politics. And so leaving the politics is an issue, and issues of sustainability certainly bring a lot of passion out. But at the end of the day, I want to look at my neighbor and respect all of what they're doing and have that respect for people. So learning to listen is a big part.
Thanks. Okay, I think we'll take one or two last questions that I have here. And so from your perspective, what's needed that I can use my leadership skills to strengthen a local food system, particularly in a rural community?
Well, getting involved with the local grocers to see where you can offer your products locally is one way. In my local town, I wouldn't think there's that much demand for local organic, but the grocery store owners really wanted to start doing it. And I'm known for growing great carrots. So we just started making sure there was always fresh, sweet, non-taste carrots at the grocery store instead of those long, skinny Imperator carrots that don't taste much like anything. And so that was a way, it took a while, but now I sell carrots to the school, and my husband is now a substitute teacher and on the school board, and he goes in and we have a farm to school program. And now all the kids in the school love blue heron carrots, and they ask for blue heron carrots, and they're changing how they eat. So getting involved just in your local grocery store or your local school district to try to get some fresh, local, tasty vegetables or fruit or meat once in a while, and just start getting kids involved is a great, easy way to just be local and be right close to home.
Question that we're going to take. We had several other questions that we'll have Ann answer, that we'll provide them for the answers for you later on. But I want to get involved in some leadership, and I'm going to move up and do something different. So where do you suggest that I start? I feel confident about what I know, and I like to tell people what I know, but where's the best place to get started so I don't come across as being a know-it-all, or I can start to make some impact?
Well, the easiest is locally, but there's a farm bill coming up. Paying attention to the different components of the farm bill and how that will affect your community or your crop selection. Washington State University is launching a new program to look at food systems, to continue to build interest for West Side students to study agriculture, because it turns out not all that many West Side students want to go to Pullman and study agriculture, but maybe they would stay on the West Side and study agriculture. So if you're interested in jumping into leadership, there's issues at the state level. Certainly the Farm Bureau is always looking at issues. The environmental communities are looking at issues. The issues around water access. There's any number of controversial issues going on at any given moment. And if you're opinionated about one of them, guaranteed there's meetings happening about them. Go sit in the back of the room for a while, hear all the voices, and then start moving up and, maybe sit in the middle of the room and ask a couple questions, and maybe even move to the front of the room and ask more questions and ask challenging questions.
Thank you. Good response. All right. This is the very last one, because we do have to break. But how do you respond to questions that you don't know the answer to, but still maintain your own credibility?
I don't know. That's what you say. I don't know. You don't punt. You don't try to jump in where you don't know. All of this is very complicated in any resource issues, and we all have to stay a student. We all have to go back to the drawing board and read more about things and study hard. That's kind of why I was so drawn to food and agriculture, because it's a lifetime of study to understand it. And that's kind of what I come up with for that.
Okay, And we want to thank you for spending time with us today and sharing your insight on leadership and getting involved in the community, how to know when you need to take a break yourself, and some potentials for some personal sabbaticals when you can't leave the farm for 6 months and that sort of thing. And so I will have some more questions to share with you to get some answers that we can share with our group. So meanwhile, in the Mountain Standard Time, you people are going to start lunch. The rest of us are going to spend a little bit of time talking about our action plans, and then we'll go to lunch. And then following that, in your own groups, you'll be working with your panel and listening to your panel, having some discussion with your panel, and then a couple more discussions within your group. And then at 3 o'clock, I will come back again, and we'll continue with a little bit that we have, and 3 o'clock Pacific time, and then come back and finish up for the day. So again, thanks again, Anne, and I know the Mount Vernon site is waiting to see you. So thank you again. Bye now. So hello, everybody, back at your sites. This is Margaret again in Wenatchee. It is 3 o'clock on Pacific time. And so welcome back. We just finished some good discussions here in Wenatchee relative to the questions about what inspired you most about today. How are you going to use some of your leadership skills? So if anybody wants to type in at their location what they came up with, that would be good as well, that you would like to share with the rest of us. And I'll watch for the Q&A where I can talk about those as well. And so what I'm asking you to do in your sites, of course, is to finish your action plan and leave those with us. The next topic on the PowerPoint talks about future workshops. I know in this area here, we're gonna share names and addresses and emails and something about what we do, and look at a way together again, or small groups can get together or contact someone that they're interested in meeting with. So that's something that you can think area as well. The other thing that might happen in some of the areas is the facilitators that you have do have a variety of workshops that continue throughout the year. And so we're willing to post those on our Women in Ag Facebook page, our Women in Ag website, and announce those so people can look for those and go to those sites where something might be happening that might be of interest to you. So again, if you are willing to share those with me when those things happen, we can certainly get them posted on our Facebook page for everyone to see. And on the PowerPoint, you see the website that we have, and in all of your materials, it's probably listed in there too, is www.womeninag.wsu.edu, where you can check that out. And one thing is probably in about a couple of weeks, the whole broadcast that we had today will be put on the website. So people who didn't hear the speakers can go back in and listen to them, or you can go back in and listen to them again if you didn't pick up everything that you wanted. And I promised that we would have the answers to many of the questions that we didn't have time to be answered by the speakers. We didn't have enough time to allow for the rest of those answers, but we'll get the answers to you. After today, in several months, I'm going to be sending out an email survey to you. I hope that you'll take a moment to answer that, because all the people that answer it will put your name into a drawing. And I'm looking for a sponsor where we can offer something to the first few people that respond to that survey, or we'll do a drawing for those answers that you send in. So please be cognizant of that survey when it comes out. We won't make it very long. But the importance of answering that survey also relates to us looking for future funding, being able to prove that what we're doing is very important and what women have learned, and of course what they plan to do with the information, and actually what they've done with the information as a result of these conferences. Some of the past results that we've had have shown that women have gone home and they've had a business meeting. They've improved their relationships with their workers, depending on the topic that we had. They did a SWOT analysis to determine, could they take on a new project, or did they have to cut back based on their finances? We've also had women who've checked their credit rating to find out what's being said about them to the world, and also did a better job of keeping track of their expenses and knowing where they stood that particular way. Other business plans prepared themselves better to go to the bank to get a loan, and found out that they had much better reception when they did that. So we do have great results so far. We're going to look for some results again as far as this workshop is concerned. And so I'm just checking to see if I have any messages that have come in that anybody has asked from any of the sites. And so somebody's asking about, can I get connected with grant loan information and where can I find resources and connections? We'll post that something on our website where some of those resources might be. So encourage you to go back to the website and check them out. And someone asked if I was muted. I hope I'm not. I'm at least talking to Wenatchee, you know, that way. And so we'll check that out to make sure that I am not muted, but at least you can see the PowerPoint. And I don't have any other questions that have come up. We'll just wait a moment for that. I once again want to thank everybody who took time out of their day to come to the Women in Ag Conference. The one question that I would like you to talk about at your site is talking about when is the best time of the year to have this conference. We moved the conference from late winter now this year to late fall, and we never can seem to find a perfect date without people having a lot of conflicts, but I think that's just busy people. And so have a little conversation at your site to find out, you know, what they think about when a good time is to have this conference. So that's all I have to say now. And so back to your local facilitators. Once again, thanks for coming, and we hope to see you next year. Bye now.